Football, or soccer, is the world's most popular sport. But where did it all begin? Historical depictions of ball games as a sporting practice stretch back thousands of years, from ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics to a game of catchball in Homer's The Odyssey. The Romans had harpastum, a game similar to rugby with physical contact, kicking and catching.
FIFA, football's governing body, sees the originator of football as being the ancient Chinese.
During the Han Dynasty between 206 BC and 221 AD, a game known as Cuju was played by both men and women. The translation of Cuju is simply kickball. In Japan, the game of Kemari was played by the nobility in the 12th and 13th centuries. The objective was to keep the ball in the air for as long as possible. In Mesoamerica, the history of ball games spans 3,000 years, and archaeologists have found over 1,500 specifically built ball courts across the region. The game was taken very seriously. Many games were part of ritual events that often involved human sacrifice. The game was brutal, and serious injuries were inflicted by the solid, heavy rubber ball. Medieval period, football in Britain wasn't much nicer. Cities and towns were hotbeds for mass, folk or mob football. Shrove-type football is a variety of this kind of style that is still played today in Derbyshire, England. Teams consist of hundreds, if not thousands of people. The playing field is the town itself. There is no referee, and there are very few rules applied. The objective is to get the ball from the centre of town to one of the two goals at either end of the town by any means necessary. A number of monarchs tried to ban football, seeing it as far too unruly and distracting from their supposedly more worthy pursuits like archery. King Edward II banned football from the streets of London, while Henry V, Edward IV and Henry VII all sought to curb football's excesses. Henry VIII owned the first recorded example of football boots, but he too once tried to ban the sport. However, none of these attempts were successful, and the rise of football could not be stopped. The first formal rules began to appear in the mid-19th century in British public schools, but the problem is that each school had its own set of rules, making matches between them very difficult. On the one hand, you had schools who preferred the kind of game which had more carrying of the ball, which would later become rugby. And then there were other schools that preferred kicking and dribbling. Obviously, that would go on to become football. The first football association was established in London in 1863 in a pub called the Freemasons' Tavern. Here, they wrote down the first rule book of football, which banned things like tripping, holding, pushing, and carrying the ball in your hands. The reduction in violence meant that the game was now more socially acceptable for women to play, and this led to an explosion of women's teams. Now, women's matches often drew in bigger crowds than men's matches. That wasn't until the 20th century when the women's part of the game was banned, halting its growth. Scotland's proximity to England set the scene for the world's first men's international football match. The match took place on the 13th of November 1872 at the West of Scotland Cricket Ground in Glasgow. A crowd of around 4,000 spectators watched the game and were kept off the pitch by a simple roped border. Scotland played a conservative 2-2-6 formation compared to England's more cavalier 1-2-7. And despite these lopsided tactics, the match ended 0-0. Now, the rules may have been written in the UK, but the game spread around the world very quickly. Wherever the British Empire or British industrial interests were, football was close behind. And there's no coincidence that there's an Arsenal in Argentina, an Everton in Chile, or that Athletic Bilbao have an anglicised name and take their kit inspiration from Sunderland AFC. The first international match played outside of Britain was between Uruguay and Argentina in 1901. However, the world governing body FIFA wasn't established until 1904, when Belgium, Denmark, France, Netherlands, Spain, Sweden and Switzerland met in Paris. Britain joined them in 1906, soon followed by South Africa, Argentina, Canada and others. After the popularity of their football tournament at the 1928 Amsterdam Olympics, FIFA began making plans for their own event. The first ever Men's World Cup was hosted in 1930 in Uruguay, and was open to all nations without qualification. However, due to the huge costs and the time of international travel, many associations declined to compete. No African or Asian nations took part, and Germany, Switzerland, and the 4 countries of the UK all said no. The French and Belgian teams faced 2-week-long boat journeys across the Atlantic Oceans just to take part. In the end, 13 teams participated across 3 weeks of matches. The final was played out between host Uruguay and neighbouring Argentina. The stadium in Montevideo was bursting at the seams, with tens of thousands left outside to listen to the roars of the crowd inside. Uruguay were 2-1 down at half-time, but came back in the second half to score 3 goals and eventually win the game 4-2. Football today is the most popular sport in the world, with teams playing in every country from Vatican City to China. It makes us laugh, it makes us cry, it makes us scream and shout. But most importantly, what football does best is it brings us all together.
It's all over, the end of an exciting, very sporting game. On the field, congratulations all round.